To identify who we are, we have to identify our own technology and settings, right? Because if we don't identify our systems, how are we going to understand anything in calculation? The basic grounds, guys, is understanding how to use your telepathy, right? Because that's already set calculations. So all technology is all done, right? What's off calculation line is the set position of species itself. Okay, so when you wake up in the morning, there's nothing really to discuss, is there? Especially if it's already in the system. If you can track or visualize the cycles in a 24 line screen, okay, it's all about understanding frames of communications, frames of divisions, frames of seconds, minutes, and hours of track calculation and clocking. It gets a lot more complicated because you don't understand your vessels through time. See? Different levels of time, tractions, right? All direct signals, right? What stands out in lines? What stands out in lines? 1, 2, and 3, right? See the move? See it all move? It's moved by itself. Don't look at me. Look at the wall. That's the true line factors, all line screen height, interference of vectors, correlates ascending track lines, indirect modification lines, time sequence times calculation, right? So there's always ways to look at things, but never look at straight at something. Always look beyond something, right? So it's important to understand, look at you over here, look up here, look up here. Don't look here, look over there, look there. Pick a point on the wall in track line provisions, and you see the 3 cycles, the 3 correlations setting attractions coming in at line position, all 3 clockings, right? So getting in position centers and line condition clocking system and travels, we have to understand not just the formulas of equations, but understanding lines and modifications, how to use the mind attraction. Okay. Getting that settings, we got platforms of communication lines, Mexican school. All different platforms, about 24 clocking. 0 to 7, all different platforms, right? Metric meters, scales, lines, check this out, the clocking. This is also through the Mexican school. Okay, look at how complicated it is. Traveling lines of 12, 3, 6, and 9. Okay, set lines of 10, 10, positions at 20 minutes, all through pi. 15 and 15, line comes to 30 minutes. It says core track interference. So I'm just showing you exactly how to travel in position. Now, when you get in 24 cycle, come in this track locations. Okay, on a 24 line setting, right? 10 minutes, and 2 track locations. 40 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 hours off through travel, right? So everything that you see through technology doesn't need balance because it's already set for you. So there's nothing to balance. There's nothing even to talk about because when your position lines and settings all through operation system is no longer an correlation lines of a question. There's nothing to question because it's already done through infinity 8. It's already done through cycles of communication. It's already done through platforms of calculation setting. It's already done through ground line communication. It's all processed through the Merkaba tester contextual region. Understand? Done. All right, so the only thing to discuss is how to use the technology you already know. Vessel communication settings of travels. Really understand how to get interactions. Basic understanding, shapes. Okay, how to travel through the shapes in a 2-line cycle, 2-line position, 3 waving pattern, all through a star line, right? Not a star line, right? A box, travel through a 3-line communication setting of a program. Travel through 1 cycle, 1 position, 2 travels and position locations into a line setting. Okay, interactions, right? So it looks like a rectangle, but it's not, right? It's just because it's a rectangle doesn't mean it's a rectangle. Just because it's a circle is a circle, or lines of highest interference is a circle. It could be anything. It could be a planet. Who says it's a circle? Just because you see it as a circle. You got to get in your own equations, right? Circle line, 1 point system, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 clocking, 1 rotation, 1 surface, 1 rotation setting. Process calculation lines, time sequence, cross line setting, box location center, in position of patterns, and 2 atoms rotation. Correlate and modify. Triangulate and box line conditions all over the teleportation waves. Process communication lines, opens line sequence and applications. Process communication of grounds, powers, line screen, high adaptation lines of surface at location of X2000. Done. So technology is everything. And then we come into this cross locations. All through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Basic, right? How to travel through it, right? Now, Earthline, yes, it starts with 1, right? There's no algorithm setting because it just stands on point of view. 1, One singularity. One singularity. That's one singularity. A binary. We understand the balance of communication setting. Unifications and interpretation. But just because I say but doesn't mean it says but. To you, it says something else, right? Balance, unifications of travel. There it is. Boom. Traveling. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, right? Get into that setting. Because if you don't do that, it changes everything technology. And all it does in position location system, sends you back in clockings of time cycle. Back in time. Back in time. Back in time. Okay, you don't want to go back in time because it communicates the line screen high interference and working about tesseract. Instead of going forward in tractions, you keep going back in line screen high adaptation lines of surface. Back in time. All right, so H doesn't have a bracket, and position line is a high center, location is space, but it does on Earth. Earth line tractions, Earth equals everything. Okay, equals nothing. Everything and nothing, right? Because nothing is the everything of nothing. Nothing equals the everything. Equals anything in set locations. So awareness, nothing of the energy line equals lines in position location to its intelligence settings, high track location system, existence, location to its system, all through calculated lines of nothingness. Right. So that's all you're going to do. Reiterate your words in frame lines, determine the frequency, set location, line conditions. Anything you say through a word equals lines, correlated lines, and negative cycle. Put you back in time and position lines of travel. Okay. So the word itself, which is really interesting, it's not a word. Okay, check this out. Right, just because it's a word, it could be anything of a word, right? But it's width, operation, remembering, division. Boom, right? Travel. Easy, right? So I'm trying to get you guys a basic understanding how to get to that line sending locations. This is on Earth line of space, okay? Starting off with a 0, okay? Now, starting off with the 1, right? That stands on point of view. I'm trying to get you guys to understand these things, all right? This is the Earth, okay? This is how you see 1 plus 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Yes, that stands on point of view, right? But in dimension, no, it travels. It has to travel. And then the sun and the moon comes in position to its operation surface. Hooah, there you go. Navigates the system, right? By the mind. The mind comes in line, communicates to its system. Species line has to understand how to direct their vessels and understand how to navigate it and understand how to get into all levels of its equation to equilibrium. Balance line, ground line, surface line communication. Is that a line? No. It looks like a line, right? But it's a platform of communication. That's all it is in directions. Doesn't look like much, right? Until you understand what it is in travel. Point lines of graphs, point lines of graphs, point lines of graph. Says correlation lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 set locations. Box line correlation lines, track location line settings into platforms, communication setting, and adaptation lines of surface. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Coloration lines, XD1000 comes in traction locations, inside position, right? So you really have to get out of those word frames and get into line condition setting. So everything location. Remember stop. Okay, stop equals lines of the Earth. Okay, yes. And it's a stop sign, right? But in space, no, it's traveling automatically. Okay, traveling through its platforms in set locations, traveling through its crop circles and line condition setting. All level setting location to its dimensional door, right? All through a stop sign. Okay. So you really have to get into your algorithms, programs, and line communication setting all levels of travel. Puts you all communication in your system, right? How's everybody doing so far? Right, having fun? Understand more lines of communication, what's going on with the line settings. Now you got crop circles, lines. Let's go into 2-track revision. Okay, go through line calculation setting. We'll go through the Arctic line, screen graph calculation lines, and all line rotations and travels. 3 indicators, and line condition setting alpha, delta, theta, and zeta. Coordinate tracking interference location alpha, theta, and omega. Coordinate tracking location setting. 3 triangulation lines, split lines on omni, 3-line rotation surface, and line condition setting position of this program that puts all communicates to its setting. Process calculations into its pi. All right, atom line sequence sets position lines of travels and point lines of graph communication. Center communication lines of the sun and moon in position locations to its Arctic center. Process calculation. Sets calculation line to its location grid and travel. Points lines of graph into metric line screens and high adaptation lines to certificate setting. Oceanics, high correlation lines to track interference. Bring the team lines of center communication. Process calculations. Right, modify high center locations, come into line calculation setting. Eye circles, line position of travels, point lines of graph, and 2 intelligent rotation surface and travel. Formation screen lines adaptation. Right? Going through the Arctic waters, line conditions setting comes into metric correlation setting to holographic lines. Grid cycles, lines cross locations to its waving line center and rotation surface. Process calculation lines of waving cycles 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations. Electrical line waters, electrical line screens into waving line cycles in water communication setting and 3 line waves lines of cycle triangulation. Process calculation line screens, high center location capsules in below line screen location underwater settings. Process communications across line signals into a dimensional line setting into solar sail and line rotation surface and traction. That equation. All right. Setting communication line screen is all levels on how to use the line adaptation lines of surface. Puts lines of communication lines of triangulation line communication to its position of its program. Right. Solar sail lines of platforms, line condition setting 4 settings. Process communication lines of 1, 2, and 3 set locations. Cross line calculation setting. Inline position of all levels. Okay. Correlates the highest interference into the finks and travel point lines of graph communication. 2 finks, right? Process lines of 1, 2 line settings, vectors over screen, flux over screen. Location grid and position location ground lines, highest interference of force. Calculation lines of ground centers, operation surface to 1x1000 plateau, in position of ground centers, operate the cycles, line condition setting, all line communicates to position of its program. Process calculation line screens, puts all levels of the finks into line screens. Telepathy signatures, one to another instructions, sets lines of T-line force, 3 line positions of provision and cycles, and a 4 line communication setting of travel, points lines and graphs. Standard communication lines of blue line cycles, and 3 lines of ground centers, highest interference and position of progress. Calculate modified communication lines of red line cycles and center core system of travel. Points lines of signal location setting into all calculation cloak and dagger. Process calculation lines of crystalline across highest interference and program settings. 1 signal, 1 center, 1 operation surface travel. Sets communication lines to the finks and line condition setting to new flux of communication. Process calculations. Takes it to the equation screen line. All done through equation. All right, that's all set up. All right. Plasma line walls, direct lines in the Arctic screen line, adaptation lines, certification setting. Breaking things down through an algorithm, process calculation lines of water interference. And we go through waving line screens into adaptation lines of force. Puts lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we go through communication lines in red line cycles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 set locations. Process calculation line illumination graphs through cross line signals. Inline position of measure and scales and balance. Very complicated stuff. All right, water containment system location electric lights. Now put position of process anti-carrying. Process communication lines, taking all lines of carbon out, line track centers into waving graphs, in line rotation surface and traction. All line direct line signals, we go into blue lines of alpha, location of beta. Beta lines of center lines back in position of beta alpha. Sets communication lines of delta. Delta comes line center location delta, line communication of theta. Theta communication lines operation line cycles, omega communications. Block centers into box, line center triangulation, process lines of 4 equals lines of 3, and line center into 7, line position of 12. Sets communication lines of 24 line cycles, line connections setting, 48 line position, 72 line communications computer framing, and 144 platform and track case line settings, operational line conditions setting to all calculate modified. That my equation. All right. Direct lines of communication lines of highest interference go into all levels. We'll go through the levy line screens, highest interference into thon. Direct calculation lines, direct signals into modifications. That puts all process calculation lines of code signals. Now we track provision lines of highest interference. Okay. And line condition setting to levels, energy lines into vortex location of its intelligence. Travel position lines of point lines of graph, x2000 travel. Position lines of process or energetic dome line, screen line, adaptation lines of service levels, energy, vector, line coordinate setting, in position, location, setting, all levels of intelligent information line and dimensional scales and process calculation lines of zero gravity and center communication setting and process calculation. That my equation. It disappeared. So the central system is already done the equations. Clocking system now, we'll go through calculations. Now we're going to triangulate lines of 15-point lines of stars. So that's 15 line communication settings equals lines of correlation lines of 20. Let's change the communication lines of 0 lines, 2 singularities, 1 singularity, 1 line rotation surface attractions. Direct calculation line, highest interference of 16 over line. Sets communication lines of 3 volume equals correlation line interference hypothetical location setting into 5 setting. Sets communication lines high center location of 3 in position location of 5 into 1 line rotations. Sets communication lines of 1 singularity, 2 singularity, 3 and 4 singularity high correlations. Track divisions lines of 5, 3, 5 lines and 1 line rotation center. Process communication of the elixirs in 3 line communication setting process communication line position of its process. Process communication lines of ground centers, operation surface, and 1x1000 routes the routers, line communication setting position of program. Elixir, power generation. Okay, directs lines, calculation of line centers, and process communication lines of ground centers, constellation screen lines, adaptation lines of waters as surface. Process communication lines of all the water, containment screen lines, adaptation lines system. Travel lines, all line the highest interference of 3 line communication. Then we go into the red line cycles, record the track interference of 1, 2, 3 in position 4, 5 lines, setting line 7 location of 8 lines of 12. Process communication high calculation line center location of crop circles, ground center line into waters, line underwater cities, and traffication line setting. Process communication high direct signals, puts all calculation lines of highest interference in Pluto. Routes the settings and process communications crossing line signals and 1 line measure, line signals, line position, line cross location setting, laser direct signals, modification cycle. Process calculating line sending high interference comes into green line cycles and generates in screen lines adaptation. Sets communication ground lines, highest interference crystalline water, and line condition setting to all levels, taking a line position of silicone attractions. Direct calculation line 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 operation server track location. Right? Direct line centers high direct signals into Fibonacci line screens, and direct signals, modification lines, and 3 line adaptation lines of surface, and 3 lines of anomaly and line center location setting of adaptation. Process communicates highest interference, puts all calculation lines. So that puts lines of kilo mic, okay, correlation setting, I line center location setting, MI line K, AI line, E line, I line setting into flux in position location, Y line screens. Graph communication lines, alpha waters, delta communications, mega lines, Intel process calculate alpha, mega, micro, and macro. Direct modification, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 tractions, 1 direct line setting in colossal, and line setting rotation surface and track location. All right, that my equation. All right, that's all done. All right, so now we go through the scale screens. Now we add position time frames into 7 lines of water tractions. 7 lines equals lines of 7, 7, 7. Cosmic universe line of 3 lines of communication equals lines of 1 binary. Line condition setting to 4 lines. Line centers of 1 transistor over line setting into resistor. Character modify into remembering cycle, awareness, location setting, and trial position lines, correlating setting. Use lines, correlation lines, attractions, and direct signals to an energetic long line. Process communication flux and line screen adaptation. Done. 7 coordinates hide center location of clock line screens. So we have 13 lines of measure. Sets lines of 3 line cycles. Sets communication lines of high center position location. So wait till it gets to 50. All right, so 18 lines of 50 tractions, set lines of 50 line centers in line position, 13 over travels. So that's 2 binaries, line setting into equals lines of 1 singularity. Sets communication ground lines and 1 indicate cross line signals. Arrow indicates position of its program in a 4 line cycle into 3 lines. 6 over line, 3 lines of 2, and 2 lines of 8 in track location. That way equation. All right, directing line signals is line conditions, dimension lines of sails. Taking 7 bodies of water. Communicates lines to plasma. Okay, sets communication lines of plasma, balance, and 7 tractions. 3 waving cycles, 1 center, 1 center, 1 center, 1 operation cycle. Correlation setting of platforms 1, 2, 3, 4 line setting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 set locations. Balance communication lines of 1 and flux capacitor line screen highest interference in solar sails and track location system that puts all levels of communication setting of process calculation. All right, so 7 waters line screen, underwater cities, right there in tractions. There's the underwater line setting, the notion liner, split lines of anomaly, sets lines of correlation setting to its position, to its mean line rotation surface and traction. That equation. Ooh, ah. All right, so we center core the system and line settings. Flux communication lines of sonar, line screen, adaptation lines of surface, and track location. All right, very powerful stuff. Center core line centers in one center, one surface, one position. Now we go through the part of accelerators. Now we added 3 line cycles. It's really interesting. It puts everything in process. Acceleration lines of past, present, and future in one line calculates setting put in 7 bodies of water, track case, and plasma line screens, and direct line signals, crossing line signals, adaptation lines of surface, and track location. Communication line screen highest interference puts lines of flux. Then we go through line position of blue, center core system and travel point lines of graph. Okay. Neutralizes correlating setting lines of waving line cycles, Waymark graph communication lines, high center metric meters, correlation lines of balance, position travels, points line signals, line communication setting, in position after projections, after travel correlates interference, position of program. That my equation. All right, so we got the underwater cities now. Below the earth line rotation cycles of generation and screen lines. There's a correlating line and position of ripple effect that causes communication of water lines, between adaptation lines, high center. 7 bodies of water, line communication setting, process calculated line, 7 over travel, line position 4 over 3, 3 over 4. Position lines of male polarity, female back and line screen, back in the 4 line cycles, correlate track interference and yin and yang, process communication lines of high center interference, 7 digital frames, direct lines, modification lines. So we take 21 line setting to 26 over correlation lines of 15 lines of volume, set lines of correlation lines of 3 volume, communication lines of thumbs up, track division lines, cycles lines of 16 over attractions, 17 over line, and 18 over track location. Position lines, operation lines, surface. Process communication lines, the green line cycles, puts lines of high center location setting and plasma line screens, high center interference into the Arctic wall that brings between communication setting, position location, all levels, area line, setting line 51, line 52, 55. Set correlation setting, track position, all measured. Scales calculation line, high interference. That's where it comes in, position location, metric male lines, high location setting. 3 correlation lines of the snake. Snakes comes in track location provision. Center calculation, solar flare screens, direct lines, modification lines. So let's go through red line cycles. Okay, so we cut off the cords, line rotation, server location, snake, line setting to its area line location setting. 51 to 2 and 55. Direct lines, modification line screens, high adaptation lines of the water surface and track location. Volcano comes in, travel lines, point lines of graph, 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of correlation, 3 lines of power, position, location, setting of travel. Points, lines of signals. Line communications high position program sets lines of blue line cycles. Blue line cycle line, acceleration, mocking screens, adaptation lines of surface, oversize the correlation setting into metric line screens, indirect lines, modification line cycle, 1 set position operation. That my equation. All right, so we got the 7 line waters now underlined. But it's very powerful how you come together, certifications and travel, right? All right, so now we sync the lines of 7 line cycles into 3 lines of 4 and 4 lines of 3, because it comes with the female polarities, guys. That's the Earth rotation center, okay? So the process communication lines of its Earth sets lines of communications, all right? Sets correlation setting and travel. So we say we have new center correlation in underwater cities. 3 communication lines, sets lines of 6 over 9. Now that's where it gets in line centers at 12, sets lines of 12, track location and provision. It's calculation line interference at 24, 48, 72, and position 144. Okay, in traction. So we take the 1 line cycle, 1 center, position lines of 4 line cycles into 4 communications. Platforms communicate lines of center of operation, surface, and traction. Direct calculation lines of clocking line, screen line adaptation of past, present, future, and line position process calculation. Calculate and modify in 12 line cycles, both line constellation and 4 line cycles, line conditions 8 and 4, lines of 2 and 7, and 1 line settings of 4 track division. Constellation lines of 12 line cycles, 24, 48, 72, and 144 in communication. Communicate ground centers, high interference. Ground centers operate the surface location setting, puts the vessel communication line screen adaptation lines as surface applications. Okay, so that puts lines of platforms going this way and platforms going this way now. Okay, very complicated stuff now, because what you understand, the underwater city is now set up in line position location setting. So now we're all in a relation system, all traffic modification line calculate underwater cities. Now it's in 7 line signals, location of its own dimension, line, position of its sail, and solar sail track location. Communication lines, highest interference of 6 over 3 over 9, and position line calculation diamond core. Sets communication lines of ground, circle line communications particle accelerator, goes around the cycles, line setting, over line cross locations and measure, defaults lines of communication at 12 lines of 6, 3, 2, and 1, and track division of cycles calculation. That my equation. All right, so the 7 waters is set up through dimension lines of settings now. Okay, syncing communication lines of linking lines of highest interference, process calculates lines. So we got one link equals lines of 7, linking is setting 3 lines of 4. So that puts line highest interference. Triangulation line into 4 track provisions, cross location signals. Process communication lines of 1, 2, 3 line cycles and 1 center of operation, right? Now, that 3 line cycle sets lines of perimeter, parameter, line interference, security, position lines of power, generate the screen lines, adaptation lines, and energetic pattern. It opens all positions, process calculation of ground centers, operation, surface, and track location. Position lines, highest interference. 1 cycle, 2 panels, line center, 7 position of all process calculation. Communicates the ground lines of 7 rotators, line sending, high operation, surface interaction. Done by equation. All right. All right. So metric scales, bounce lines, the argument line sending location of this process. But all in position lines, high calculation, right? So earth tones, direct lines, modification lines of biorhythm lines, screen location metric meters, line calculation by all surface, line connection setting and process calculation. Center chord line cross, sets lines position to data formation line, screen adaptation, process calculation lines, ground centers, into circuitry line connection. All right. Process communication lines of 1 atom, rotation, surface interactions. Direct lines, modification lines of 6 over 8 over 10 over 12 in setting and line rotation, surface and track location. All right, so platforms and ground settings, new water surface is now in set location. All right, XC1000 comes on 2 cycles in line setting. Sets communication lines of water in positions across line signals in water, line connection setting. Process opens a portal, line directs signals into line setting locations 50,000 below feet. Process calculates line ground centers, opens all signals, and a portal communications that crosses line signals into a part accelerator back in time. Center calculates on settings lines of 26 lines of 52 line interference, 18 lines of volume, high position, 3 centers. Cross line signals into operation lines and routers and routers, line positions program that puts everything back in center location, center of operation, surface interaction. Done by equation. That's done. All right, so we limited the graph lines. We set a green line cycle, line position with process communication. Direct lines, process line, go into lines of green. 3 lines of communication green cycles correlate to track interference, high position location. Then we go into red. Security line division centers, process calculations, spring line, screen highest interference, and position of process. Process communicates high interference. We go into blue line centers, high correlations and interactions, direct modification. Bring modification lines in line setting, however, black over screen, black over correlation, black track location setting. Done. All right, it's all done now. Okay, very powerful stuff. Okay, complicated, right? All through part accelerated line setting. Waving line cycles of water line screen is now in adaptation lines of surface set locations now, guys. Very complicated stuff, right? All right. Center core settings and the water line screen has the 3 lines of 4 that perimeters its line scales and communication lines of singular. 1 signal, line connection setting into 3 over 4. Okay, goes lines of over. Cross lines, high center interference of 4 line cycles, puts lines equals lines of 0.7 interactions. Calculate line centers, bring back in line rotations into 2 negative line cycles, puts lines of 0.07 in track location. Okay. Process calculates lines, general AI, communicates graph line, signature patterns. Water containment screen, alpha line tones, and 3 lines of measure. Scales communicates lines of earth 1, 2, and 3 track location. Done by equation. All right. Signature patterns are already set up to water interference. Program line, position location, 1x1000 process, 2 line cycles, 3 line communication and measure. Scales balance communication line, high center interference, opens all signals, and all modification line, screen adaptation lines of surface. Communication lines of 3 triangulation, flux, line connection setting to a box line rotation center, correlate line connection setting in position of process. Magnetic high line setting is screen lines adaptation of highways. Process communication line, 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 operation surface, pixelation graphs. Film strips over design, cross-line signals, line connection setting, line position notes, operation surface, and track location. Done by equation. All right. Okay, so the underwater city is now set up the highway screen now. We have the water line communications, energetic dome lines, and we got the process calculation line screens. Now we set up the data highway circuits and line position process. Underwater cities of 3 line cycles into 4 correlations. Okay, so that's position of 3 cycles. 1, 2, and 3 settings, right? Process calculations. Now, position lines of highest interference, we had 4 lines of cycles, right? Because it's female cycle line conditions of 1, male cycles lines of 2, female cycles of 4, and male cycle locations of 0. Platforms of 1 cycle, line position of travel point lines of graphs. Calculation lines a dimensional line into location grid and travel in position to its operations surface that puts all communication sending in line communication to its position, all through calculation sending to travel. Got my equation. So we scale the balance in center core system. Electrical lines, electrical cords, sending line position as water lines, changes all communication setting and travel position on the graphs. Directs modification lines of center core system and center communication of center position. Platform's communication line setting sets up flux lines. Now the flux lines correlate to highest interference into levels. Sets lines of communication lines highest interference. That puts lines of the crop circles, split lines of anomaly, line screen, adaptation lines of surface and track location, and an XT1000 split lines of anomaly and rotation surface and track location. That my equation. Okay, accelerator line, high positional water frames. Now we go through all levels, taking out line communication. No more carbons, gone. That's it. Now we're in the silicon line and crystalline. Crystalline correlation setting atoms, positional process. Platforms, cross-line signals, line kinesis setting adaptations. Oracle screens, record the track interference in one cycle, one center, one operation surface. Flux communication on both side lines, communication lines interference. Satellite communication, two track location settings of travel. Interference lines, ground line settings into one cycle. That's lines of 3 in position of 6 over 7, 8 over 9, 9 over 10, 10 over 10 lines equals lines. I got an X line channel, process lines of 2 line rotations into 2 line cycle. Now, it's complicated because you understand the graphication of water lines, underwater cities. All right, atom settings indicate position of platform 1, right? Process communication lines at grounds, the center communication high setting. All right, it's done. So we had 3 line cycles, 1 atom line, center line in position of 6 over 9, 9 over lines of 10, flux capacitor lines of 2, 2, and 1 setting, and position of 2 tractions into 1 lines of 8 line rotation surface. That communicates high center location setting the flux line circulation, line kinesis that input position of progress. Process calculation lines at ground centers, operations service in the underwater cities, and line communication setting that puts everything into process communication lines of 3 lines of 4, communication high center location of 4 lines of 3, calculation lines of female polarity, and center communication lines of center operation lines of 3 metric meters, 3 lines of cycles, 3 line division, 3 correlations at 3 centers. That puts line position locations of 3 lines of 4, 4 lines of 3, and 7 correlation. 7 lines of 12, we had 12 line cycles, 12 line position, 12 lines of south. Earth track interference at 24, 48, 72, 144 platforms, communication setting to travel. That my equation. All right, so setting up lines of scales is understanding how to set up position lines of travel location. So we have location wall, cross line signals in one center, right? Communicate high interference in 2 line cycles and line positions, ground centers, waving line, water line, screen line, adaptation lines of surface. Process lines of 3 lines, okay? Put in the water containment line position back into 4 settings and track locations. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 locations, right? So we cross the line symbols. 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines, and 5, 6, 7, and 8 locations. Process calculation and cross line signals in the opposite directions in the same location surface. Also an 8 line communication setting, space lines of time and space lines of space. We process communication lines of grounds. We open up the cycles, open up the system, open up line centers of center calculation. Process communication line height and location, 0 lines, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 center line position, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 line position, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 line position, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 line position, 4 panels, line conditions program. Process calculation line and location grid, sets position to its rainbow graph screen, into VR line, send it in cleansing and track location of travel. Sets communication ground centers in underwater cities and powers a generations green line that crosses signals of platforms in direct line position to its calculation. Direct calculation modification line screens, we add the green line cycles, center coordinate system and travel point lines of graphs. Then we go through the magnetic highway line screen and position of center coordinate system of green matrix. Directs lines of water, contain the screen lines adaptation, signal lines, modification lines, screen adaptation lines, computing line rotation surface, computing line high interference, data formation lines, OMI highways, narrow links and correlation lines of track location, waving cycles, waving generation lines, infinity line rotation survey, correlation setting, travel positional point line communication. Okay, so we go through the red line cycles. All right, so we center lines of 1 in position of 2 and 3 centers of core. We indicate 1 position of 2 into 3 line cycles. That's 1 position, 1 panel. Cross line signals into 1 in position of 2. Data formation lines of 3 tractions, 3 divisions, 3 centers, 3 correlations, and 3 set locations. Sets communications cross line signals into waving line screens. Laser direct signals modification to energetic line conditions of path of a pi in track location. All right, done by equation. Pi generating line centers of water line is a 7 location setting of travel. Okay, it's very complicated stuff. Like this is extremely complicated because it's all levels of formula of equation and settings, right? All right, so now we're going to go through the waving line screens of 35 lines, and we're going to split lines of anomaly of 3-track division lines of cycles into flux, and go into flux, we go into flux, and equal correlation lines of 3, and position equals lines of 4. Sets communication lines of 3, and triangulation lines of 1, and position of power. All right, so singularity of 5 and singularity of 3 sets specification of binary. Okay, transistors, line condition setting. Process calculates the line screen, puts lines at all levels into remembering, into its awareness. High line centers to neutral log correlations, intelligent lines of its balanced position of travel. Point centers, point setting, point directions, and calculation. All right. Direct calculation lines of flux adds lines of 2 tractions, 1 line setting into dx1 and position location of 1 surface. Process calculation lines of flux adds lines of 3, 2, 1, and 0 set location. Dimension lines of scales, dimension lines of surface and traction. Okay, process calculation, we take the triangulation into 1 center, 1 operation, 1 surface, 1 rotation setting. Process correlation lines in high center interference and metric location centers into center communication setting to underwater cities and track location. Okay. So we change the anomaly line to switch the core centers into acceleration and to over cross calculations. Okay. So we set lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 platforms of setting, set position operation lines of surface. Okay, done by equation. There's so many ways to do formulas equations, but you have to understand how this sets up well communication in your water containments, how to use the energized setting line into plasma line screens, dimension lines, communication of quantum widths, connections over line, communication lines, high positions with balance. All right, so we go through the B line. B track location lines indicate 1 singularity, 1 equals lines of S, sets lines of A, AX, and we go into TX, and we go to EX in calculation. All right. Awareness lines, 1x line, 3 lines of cycles, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 calculation, 1 balance. Okay. All right, so we go into the AX, which is awareness line condition setting to 1x line and center core system and travel point lines of graphs into metric meters, correlation lines of scale. Then we go into TX, which is a telegraphing, telecommunication, telewaving line set locations into teleportation, 4 settings. Process calculating line screens, highest interference of a tunnel line that puts lines at EX, the external line condition setting, to the internal line rotations. Off calculates line inline rotation setting, high in lines of high equals lines of 1, 1, 1, 1. Position lines of panels in position of weather lines, high center location of 1, 2, 3, 4. Sets communication 1, 2, 3, 4, and line settings of binary. Equals lines into position of 3 lines, which is 1 singularity. Process calculates bracket lines of 4 line cycles in position of singularity. 7 correlation lines at 7-digit position of new operation line cycles. And center core line triangulation, line rotation, surface, and traction. Done by equation. All right. So the binary is already set up through the water lines. The VR set's now set up into its own operation line cycles and part of accelerator chambers. Now, directing modification sets lines of tone, rhythm tone, biometric meter tones, correlation lines of bio. It's kind of like art in line screen. So it has a core track division lines at all levels of awareness, line can center remembering, line can setting to its teleportation. Correlates setting lines of travels, point lines of cross line signals. Sets communication lines, send locations, equals lines of correlation and attractions. Awareness lines, remembering cycles, line condition teleportation 1, position 2, 3, 4 cycles, line condition setting a 3 line rotation surface. Okay. Platforms are one cycle, one line, center, one rotation system. Done by equation. Mm-hmm. So what you want to do, I know it's going to be very complicated, guys, but you have to really get it in position on what's going on with the center calculation that's already set in calculation modification. Now we go through the graph calculation lines of settings. We go through all positional programs. Okay, so we center core lines of box, one center core, right? Process communication across lines of 3 cycles, right? All right. Then we go into data formation line screen. Sets position lines over cross location settings and travels. All right, so we direct signals modification. Cross-line signals platforms of 1 in position of 2 and 3 settings. Okay, calculate lines and 1 holographic line and 2 lines of screen lines, adaptation lines of surface and track location. Process line setting cross-line signals, line conditions at 3 settings. Okay. So it sets lines, communication lines, and ground lines of 1 in position of 2 and 3 platforms, walking signals, location to a system. Okay. Process calculation lines of 2 tubings into 4 lines of 6. Sets lines of 6, lines of 8 in 10 and 12 set location. Okay. All right. So we get the X2000 cross-line signals. Set location lines of laser lines, grids, and location setting and process calculation. Okay. Ground center operationalizes surface, puts all levels of astral projections setting. Crosses communication lines of platforms is understanding what's going on through its measure of scales and balanced communication. Direct modification lines of highest interference, set correlation lines of highest allocation system into lines of pyramids in 3 cycles in 1 cycle. Sets communication lines of 3 settings into water containment screen location adaptation lines of surface. That my equation. All right. Now we just bring out those 3 pyramids. Blue line cycles, 1 position, 2 position, and 3 cycles, 1 setting. Once you bring that out, line communication setting comes in the VR line setting and cleansing and rotation surface and track location. Okay, done. It's all done. All right. Now we just go with the water containment lines, solar screen, direct signals, invisible charts, invisible waves, and line screen adaptation lines of surface. Done by equation. 3 ground centers, line condition setting. All right. Now, getting to understand how to use this in traction and locations. See? Right? Direct signals, right? All through time sequence. All right, coordinates calculations of flux. All right, charging mechanism lines of the vessel and communication to its screen. Now we go into adaptation lines of surface. Let's go in traction. 1 modification, 1 ground centers. 2 line position, 3 settings. Okay. Crosses line, box line, frame into 2 lines of measure and 3 location. All right. Direct lines of 1, 2 into 3 fours of panels. Right. Process correlations. 1 ground sound, 1 compound location. All right. X2000 comes in, docks the system and travel. Okay. Process correlation lines of grounds. Set position lines of platforms 1 and position location platforms 2. Sets correlation lines of platform 3. Cross line signals. Line setting operation line surface, track positions calculation. Platform 0 in correlation lines and its earth line rotation surface and traction. Okay. All right. So get position lines of center, flux, and position of vessel calculation. Travel positional point lines. Now it realigns, recorrelates in line condition setting and vortex, right, into here, into the tubing. Process calculation lines put you in all levels of measure and scale. Okay, from there, and then you go from here, and then you basically your particle system. Let's go through light screens. Let's go through adaptation lines of surface. All right. So we set to here in correlation. Let's go through red line screens and direct signals. Modificate centers and travel. Okay. All right, so we have the low line cycles, line centers, high location, setting, top rotation. Travel point lines of graph, invisible charts. Let's go through green centers and line rotation setting cycles. Green line rotation surface. That's green line cycle, line generation, screen line. Okay. So it's communication across lines, vortex communications on levels into another platform communications. Ground centers lines of setting and process calculation. Okay. All right. So metric meters of scales, ground line size interference. Cross the signals into constellation. The operation line, the calculation setting opens up the portals and stargates to measure. Communicates the ground center interference and position location to a system, how it comes in line setting, to the sun and moon and program setting of huge adaptation. Okay? All right, it's already set up. Okay, so the vessel is set up in tubing. Now, we have to understand how to balance this out. And so we go through 45 line angle, no time frame. This is 0 lines of calculation into all levels 15 cycles. Okay, singularity, singularity, cancel out, and 3 cycles. Equal line correlation, center course setting, circulation, rotation, surface, and traction. All right, so now we add the 4 lines, 5 lines, 0, 1, and we add line condition setting and process. That puts some 5 line screen lines. Center core tractions, 1x1000 platform. Okay, platforms 1, 2, and 3 as settings into 4 set locations. Okay, then we go into platforms line setting A, B, C, and D, and line condition setting that puts a data highway and line screen height and center interference into vortex of design and 3 lines of cycles and track location. Very complicated stuff, isn't it? All right, so we bring out the equations. Let's go through the green line cycles, center core system, and center calculation, directing modification. Right? Then we go through the red line cycles and line condition setting, security, line condition. And then we go through all of the blue that correlates the system of in and out and audio line screens adaptation. And then we go through cloak and dagger, says communication line screens, adaptation lines of surface. And it comes out through equation. Right? All right. Setting up the water containment screen, all through correlation lines of calculation, is knowing exactly how to bring things out through its equation line. Center course system of travel, point lines of graph, point lines of setting, and part of accelerator chambers and set calculation. Takes it out of the equation line screen. All right, directs signals. Platforms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 locations. Set lines at 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 set calculations. All right, graph settings. Cross line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and set location. Then we go through line screens into blue line cycles, circular rotation line, rotation centers correlation. Ground centers, cross line signals, 1x2000 comes out, sees what's going on, puts position lines of power, generates the screen lines, adaptation. Process calculation 1 center, change the acceleration lines into the settings. Routes the routers, line conditions across symbols into all of the crop circle and set application. Acceleration line screen sets line centers of 2 tethers into 3 lines of splits and 4 settings of traction. Position of process, sun and the moon comes in line position and setting, routes correlations into 1 line communication with setting. Okay, done by equation. All right, so this is all set up the water lines. That's all set up now. 3 pyramids line screens back to 0. 7 bodies of water back to 0. 7 plasma screen line direct signals are back to 0. Crystalline communication line center pixelation is all back to 0. Communication line T reception lines are all back to 0. Everything's back to 0. 0 equals lines of nothing, equals lines of everything, and equals lines of anything attractions. Now we're here in attractions. Puts lines of 1 into 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 operation, surface, and traction. Done by equation. We're already there. Now putting the lines of the VR is we understand how to use the vessel correlation. Now get in the plasma screen, like I said in travels, locations your system all through teleportation, how to go from one to another, okay, the 3 line condition setting, all through your solar communications. Direct modification 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface. Position locations where the X2000 can be anywhere in platform communication. All right, cross-line signals, line connecting here in process calculation. Acceleration going back in time, past, present, and future, and travel. Point lines of graphs, center core system, time jump. Sets up location grid and line setting to its operation surface and track location. Right? Process line, security line, defense line, and rotation centers at 3 split lines of anomaly. That equation. Metric scales is understanding how to use graph calculations from the screen lines, adaptation lines of service. Now we're going to go through line settings. We'll wait till it gets to 40. 40 line settings, time back line, screen lines, location 40 line settings into correlation. So we're going to go to 40, 49 to 40. Okay. Locking signal, singularity, 1 circle line rotation, 1 center. Now we go through time frame. flux and communication. We add the 49 line cycles, 4 generations, and 9 cycles. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 settings. Right? Travel point lines, graphs. Then we go into 4 lines of panels, into line signals, 1, 2, and 3, and 4 set locations. Process calculated lines of 0 gravity, 0 operation, 0 surface, and rotation center, and correlation lines of track position. That equation. All right. So it's amazing how you get these things done all through timeline. Direct and redirected position of signals. So we go through 15 line cycles. Now we go through binary of 2 equals lines of binary, equals lines of 1 resistor, and 2 equals lines of transition and liking setting. That's a 24 waiting line into time frame. That puts position lines of frame setting. Okay, I'm just going through frame communication center travels into 1 CPU unit. Correlate track interference into initiate, run setting. Go through EX line, or EX line, 3 travels lines of 3, 3, 3. And provision lines of 2, 2, 2. And security line, division lines, graph communications. PIP, position lines of graphics, and 3 line rotation surface and traction. That equation. Now we already know how to connect with our templates and our tablets. Now we just understand how to use the communication lines of screens, adaptation lines of service at 51 line cycles. Equals lines of 2 atom line setting, but the atoms are going to offline communication. Set of course system line setting to 1/60,000 setting. Okay, that correlates to calculation lines going back in time in position of 2 panels into 4 setting locations. Right now we take 3 lines of 6, 36 above, and we put 18 and below, and we put 5 in the center of travel. Right, 2 graph split lines anomaly, 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface. Now, gets really interesting. I have 1 ground, 1 8 center, routes the setting, and position to its crop circle, line connects the setting position. Cross the calculation lines of 5 center, sets communication to its position. Then we add 5 line cycles and center communications, right? So we triangulate the position lines of high center locations in position of timestamp, process calculation line interference into box for rotation to a mainframe in position. Process calculation lines, high center interference. We take line position of panels, line setting and rotation in position location. Process calculation lines of 1 cycle, 1 8, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction. Direct calculation lines, high cross line signals, location grids, location panels, and line setting, line condition setting, and position of process. All right, how that's set up is all through ground centers. So we go through blue cycles. We just go through the blue line cycle, line condition setting process, right? 2 travels, lines, rotations, 1 of 8, 5 line cycles, and 3 lines of 6 in process communication. It's all set now, right, through the waters. All right, so the water set up through the ocean line, which is another ocean below, which is another line screen height center location setting. All intelligence is now swimming there in line position location. The portal is now open. Portal's open through tractions, all direct signals. Right, intelligence line screens coming in, tractions, and 3 line cycles. Court the center interference, directs modification lines into waters of containment screen line. Process communication opens all signals, open all system, open all travel, all position calculation. All right, so go through the water line screen in a 4-line cycle and 4 settings. Process calculation lines, X8000 comes in, X8000 comes in, mothership comes in, and travel. Okay? Communication settings, line setting lines to all levels of process, setting line communication setting crossing. Okay, crossing reference, line connection setting, all levels location grid, flux lines, communication lines of 2 lines of vectors, cross line signals, and pi generation. Okay? So that's communication lines of intelligence information. Done my equation. That's it, done. All right, I know there's a lot going on, but you have to understand how I set time frames and location of node frames, direct and redirect. So you guys have to really understand how to direct signal location. So 7 bodies of water, line screen locations, streams, line conditions, and lakes, line communications, and in position locations, 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 operation surface. So everything is back to the nothingness. Okay, equals everything, equals lines of everything. And anything in between, right? So there's no between of anything, no separation of settings above or below correlation. It's all through platforms and travel, and position lines of 3 lines of 4, 4 lines of 3, and travel point lines of graphs. Merkaba, tesseract, tetrahedron, line torical fields, line settings, and correlation lines of track location. Process calculation line setting in membrane cycles, line position is calculation. Calc modify and line conditions equal lines in between, in position of process, water containment, screen lines, adaptations on platforms and setting, sea line levels and travel, and point lines of graphs. All right. Metric meters, lines, water containment, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, puts everything in process communication lines of balance. All right, so in position locations, we go through graph lines. Now the graph line set lines of zeros, and process line communication setting process lines of 0 and process line communication of 0. One split, one line cycle, one center, one surface, one traction. All right. Line signals down to the earth in location. All right. 3 split lines of anomaly. Process lines of platforms 1 and traction. Okay. Set lines of 2, set lines of 3 and 4. Okay. Sets communication lines of 2 settings, line condition settings of 1. Position, position, location. All right. Ground settings into a film strip and 4 line cycles as split lines of anomaly. Graph calculation lines of roadway. Cross lines of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 set locations. All right, so we got the highway. We got set up the highway line condition setting to the location grid and line setting. Platforms 1, platforms 2, platforms 3, and platforms 4, and track location. Now we have a direct line symbol. Sets lines of 1 in position 2 and 3 and 4 settings. Okay. Then we go into the blue charge mechanism line screen into over lines of 2, 3, 4, and over on pi. Then we set position lines of metric meters, lines of calculation cross line signals, location grid, and position over power. Then we eliminate the graph lines of correlation and track lines. We have set 12 DNA, 12 DNA, 12 DNA, 12 DNA, set locations of 12 DNA, equals lines of 5, equals lines of 5, equals lines of 5, equals lines of 5. Now it's done. All metric meters, line calculation, set DNA track location is done through location of 5 platforms communication setting, all through 5 central settings. Puts lines of 5, 5, 5, 5. Metric meters, correlation line interference into a binary and reline condition setting, a future adaptation of the now, split lines of anomaly, 2 atom line center location of center. Process calculation line size set location. Process communication lines of center. Process communication of platforms, line screen locations. Process line communication of center. Process communication line ground location setting, process line communication of center. Sets position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 line centers, 8 line division, 8 line rotation, 8 surface location of space. Done by equation. Now we set lines of communication lines of panel. This is where it comes into mass. Okay, matter. Okay, where it comes solid matter and travel. Okay, very complicated stuff. All right. So we got 4 provision lines of 5. Now we have 3 lines of 4 and 4 lines of 3. Now we just bring in the polarities. Circle line communication lines of Earth in position of 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 inhibitor line rotation. Travel point lines of graph in position lines of 2 settings in all levels at 3 line communication setting position of program. Direct calculation lines of 3 line cycles, 3 line communication setting position of process. Line conditions of 4 settings, 4 Earth line rotations and inhabitation zone line condition setting process communication. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's all done, right? So we got platforms and setting, process calculation of the green line cycles, green line system, green line symbols, and green lines activation surface and traction. Now we go through line conditions, line security. We had 2 lines of panels, 2 line division, 2 line rotation, and 2 correlation. Then we have a direct line signals, and then we come into blue lines of surface, water containment lines of 7, 7, 7, 7. Okay? And process communication lines, high center interference into visible chart waves of correlation setting and pixelation graph correlation lines, hologram line condition setting in the VR system. Now it comes out with the equation. All right, now it's coming out, right? There it is, done. Right? The water containment now is in a 5-line cycle and a 4-line position location cycle. That generates the screen lines as part of accelerated line communication setting that puts everything in SOCOM, anti-carrying location, and crystalline waters in track locations. All right, now we have the underwater city, the new ocean. That puts lines of calculation. So when I say new, it's already adaptation line, position, muscle memory, and track locations. So new charging mechanism line screens puts all levels of electrolytes. That communicates lines of H2O. H2O factors over line. Communication lines are location of flux into Y screen and position lines of 3 settings. Go into the console lines of 1 atom, 1 position, 1 traction, 1 division. Okay. So It's a lot to take in, I'll tell you. All right, so flux and nomination screen lines, adaptation lines of service to a crop circle linking study to a capsule. Directs modification lines to U, traveling through line signals, line condition setting process to pi, and line condition setting that routes its routers into its umbrella, into its ether, into its core, into its ferment, and line rotation surface and travel. That's my equation. So the umbrella is now an inline setting that operates line calculating setting, puts all position locations. Track provision lines is 244, equals correlation lines of flux. Okay, equals lines of 3. Triangulation lines of 3. Sets lines of 6/9/12, and there's 24 line cycle. Sets position of 144 platform in a 4-line cycle. Okay, that puts position lines of center. 144 equals lines of 3. Calculation modifies. 3-line cycles equals lines of 3 equals lines of 3 equals lines of 3. Diamond shift line core settings of travel. Okay. Now 24 line cycles adds 2 line cycles, 4 line division, 4 crosses lines, 1, 2, and 3 and 4 settings of travel. So we take the 2 lines of cycle, center core system, 4 lines of cycles, and 4 line division. Calculates lines equal lines of 1 up, 1 down, cross line signals, binary reline positions, program calculation. Process calculate the lines of equal line settings and 1, 2, and position of 3 and 4 settings of travel. Points lines of graph, point lines of system, 1x(t,000) travel, point lines of graph. Okay. Platforms 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings. 1, 2, and 3 set locations. Okay. All right. So we take the 3 lines of cycles in the diamond, and we take the line position location to its box, and we position location setting to its triangulation, and we put position of box, and we put triangulation in box location. Now, directing lines of cycles is a 3-line setting, 6 lines of 9, sets lines of past, present, and 3, 6, 9, and future 6, 9. So we change line communication setting, 24, 24, 24. Sets communication lines of 144, center of operation lines of past, present, and future, center core lines of flux, and line position as program, and center calculation through pi. Done. All right. So I know it's complicated stuff, but it's got to get done because it's already done. Platform's line setting 1 indicate position of process of sonar at a 3-track location. Direct calculation lines of 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface. Okay, in track location. All right. Now, understanding the pi in set locations, 3 pi's, right? So we can x(t,000) planet forward line settings of setting line communications, travel point lines of center, and operations surface and platform communications setting of docking. Docking lines of highest interference of 3 settings, 3 settings, 3 settings, and 3 settings. Past. Center core centers of flux and position locations into error line dynamics. Line screen adaptation lines of biorhythm and traction. Process calculates line interference to other x(t,000) deductive system. Power over line screen. Directs modification lines of travels and point lines of communication. All right, so we have a center core system. Now we go through pi into 3 generation split lines of anomaly. That puts position lines of geometric lines of correlation setting to molecules of design. Platforms of pi generates the screen lines of 1 router, line condition setting, and position location of the system. Done by equation. All right. All right, scales communicate. Now I'm sending security lines to the water now. Okay, so scale lines is a ground centers. Now we got a position location settings of flux. Flux lines of 2, 2, 2, and triangulation of 2. All right. All right, so 2 division, 2 locations, 2 centers, 2 calculation. You guys have to learn how to cross your signals, right? Platforms and location grid. Here's location grid, right? Security line, division line, and process calculation lines. So 2 over line, 2 over cross, 2 over division, 2 center calculations. All right, so we got 1 center core system and center core setting into a black hole and line condition setting position of process. All right, so the cross stream 1 x(t,000) platitudes 1 signal, vortex lines, cross line signals, location, and 4 system and travel. Okay, now center core lines is the Earth, right? Process calculation 1 setting, 2 setting, 3 setting, 4 setting, 5 setting, 6, 7, 8 lines, 10 lines of 12, and 12 lines of 24 and track location. All right, center core system. Okay, platforms 1 setting, sending lines of 3-4 line cycles and line conditions cortex into a dimensional portal that opens all signals in position of travels that point lines its graph in position location of system of time calculation line held location setting no half pipe. Done by equation. Right? So security is set up through the waters now. Woof! A lot of understanding what's going on through travel. All right. So we're in one ground setting. That's where we are in traffication. Is there a provision lines of intelligence setting locations to its under communication to its system underlays or line condition to its relay position of its program? No. There's always a centricality line setting. If it's one line cycle, it knows exactly where it's going through 0 of 5. Seconds and minutes and hours line setting. So we had seconds lines. Let's take position location weights to 35 cycles. Setting correlation lines at 0 lines of 5, and position lines at correlation lines of 1 ground setting. 30 million line cycles, 5 center line condition setting, 0 gravity line position of 5 set location. Process 1 line ground center. Right? That automatically puts 1 line cycles into 13 lines of communication. Okay, and line set is a 12 contraction. Right? Puts lines of 13 lines of center, 12 lines of cycles, sets correlation lines of flux in a 24 line split, east, west, north, and south, in line calculation setting, center operates at 20 line rotation, surface attraction. Done by equation. All right. But it's very powerful how you go through this line condition. Okay, how that's all set up. Zebra's going, woo, when's this going to end? Well, it's already done there. So, all right. So your throat is changing because you're just coming out of the waters now, right? So, all right. So that's done through equation. But I just wanted to show you what's happening and how this is all set up. To understand the travels, the mechanisms, and the waters, and the containments, and the holograms, and the VR system of cleansing the system in position travel point lines of graphs, bringing everything back in its data where it's supposed to be in its operation of its vessel. Okay. All right. So vessel calculation lines, vessel equals lines into telepathy, lines having appearance telekinesis, line kinesis setting, and calculation modification lines into telepathy. Sets lines of telepathy 1 cycle, line kinesis setting 24 line cycle. Sets calculation lines at 12 cycles, and line conditions 12 cycles, 12 cycles, 12 cycles. Sets lines at 24 cycles in the center. Okay, so sets this calculation line position location at 24, 48, 72, walking centers, lines, 144 tractions. Okay, direct lines, one line cycle, 4 settings, and then you go 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations. Process lines of 72 lines of computer framing into line condition setting into telepathy, right? Telekinesis of telepathy, 3 line cycles, right? 3 correlation setting, attractions, and provision. So vector course, velocity, volume, and vacuum, all right? Process communication lines of location grid and center communication lines of interpretation vehicle that sets communication to its position of program, all right? Platforms and setting in 3 line cycles. Platforms and setting in 4 line cycles in travel. Process and setting in 4 line cycles going in position location of the system. Process going forward in line condition setting position of its program. Okay, look how powerful that is. All right, so we take the 144 and we take the 72, 48, 24, and 12 platforms, communication, ground centers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You cross signals, right? Then you calculate the 1 ground center into portal communications and equals lines of 24. Gets into telepathy, telekinesis, and telepathy of cycles. Okay. Then we go into position lines of the Earth, set location. That's the Earth. Process calculation line height is center location setting, ion line setting, high rotation cycles, generate the communication lines. So we had 12 line cycles in position location of center. Now we go into process calculation lines. We go in line communications, 12 line cycles, and position lines 11 into 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 set location. All right, so the center core line center, the plasma line setting picks up grounds. position of 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and position setting. Okay, process calculation, right? Energetic lines, waving lines, screen lines, electrical line communication, right? All right, so direct lines the panel, operate the signals, operate the system, operate the center of calculation. Done by equation. It's all set up now. It's all done. What do you think? It's all done. So what does that put us at to? 17 over 8. See? Theta communication lines, the ground lines, and one telepathy lines to locations and telekinesis line kinesis telepathy puts 17 over 8. Okay? One line setting, new line setting, a 7 line position of digital frame. It's not a coincidence that it's one ground of 7, an infinity of 8. We're in process communications now travel. Now we're back in location setting of 16 over 8. Then 15 over pi. Then 14 over screen. And direct locations back at 16 over 8, 17 over line, 17 over pi. So that puts everything back into application of measure and scale calculation of balance. Very powerful stuff, right? So it's all done, right? It's not a coincidence how things are done, right? So you have to really understand how this all works. And once you understand how everything works, everything platitudes to visual location lines of travel is a mechanism. Okay? It's very powerful when you start recognizing these things all through process. How to set this up, right? In 17 over 8, right? And that's how we finish. Clocking system went from line setting at 16 to 17 and then back to 17 of 8. Now it's into 15, right? Remember I told you about 15 over 8? What did I tell? What did I say it was going to happen in position? This is processing going back in time instead of calculating lines of 15 over 16 over 8, 17 over 8. How it goes back to line setting to 17 to 16 to 15. So it's amazing how in position, is it a coincidence that we're in 1, 1, 1, 3, 5? No, nothing's coincidence. Once you understand the muscle memory and applications. Now we're in 16 over 8, right? And we're still in 1, 1 in position, all levels. Wait till it gets back in 15 lines, screen lines, adaptation lines of cycles, and in 50 cycles, puts everything back in track locations to your system. Okay, all through calculation of its clocking. Okay, now it's at 17.8, back in where it's supposed to be. And that's it, we're done. Any questions or comments, let me know. See you in 5.